Welcome back. Now, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has reiterated its advice to Nigeria to step up efforts to bring more people into the tax net and increase taxes as a means of generating revenue to cut borrowing. Speaking on tax reforms required, the IMF said emphasis should be on improving tax compliance and tax brackets, citing Nigeria's tax revenues as one of the lowest in the world. Now, these suggestions emerge from sidelines of the ongoing IMF World Bank spring meetings in Washington, D.C. In its latest fiscal monitor released on Thursday, the financial agency also restated the need for Nigeria to phase out its controversial petrol subsidy and redirect such funding to targeted subsidies on critical development drivers like health and education. According to the Debt Management Office, the country's debt profile is in excess of 42 trillion naira, with the government planning to borrow more to meet its 2023 budget obligations. Joining me to discuss this further now is Sopitan, who is a principal partner, Woodridge and Scott Consulting. Thank you very much, Mr. Sopitan, for joining us on the program. Not the first time IMF would be advising, giving this kind of advice now, especially when it comes to tax. What do you make of this latest advice now coming from that global financial body?
Well, thanks for having me, and greetings to all Nigerians. Look, like you say, the IMF has been at this for a while, has always been advocating for the same general policy initiatives, or if you like, economic ideology, which typically tends towards the free market ideology, where they're saying, look, stop subsidies for petroleum and increase taxes. And of course, reduce borrowing in this case now. So yeah, I think the IMF has a very good point, especially with regards to our tax revenue challenge. So we always say when we look at the Nigerian budget that the budget appears perhaps small, especially when you do it on a per capita basis. But I think that beyond the size of the budget, we need to look at the revenue question. The challenge that the federal government of Nigeria has faced for as long as I can remember is that we are simply not generating enough revenues as a country. So that definitely needs critical attention. The IMF is spot on with regards to how to go about that. So we need to be talking about increasing our tax rates on the one hand, but in a very carefully articulated and carefully targeted way, such that you do not stifle growth and development, considering the fact that Nigeria is burdened with a very a heavy poverty population, a high population of people living below the poverty line. So we need to increase our tax rates in a very targeted and careful way. We need to increase very critically the tax net, and I think this is where our government has failed consistently over the years. To increase the tax net is not really as difficult as one might think, but
the question is, if it's not as difficult, why have we not been able to do it? Because not quite long ago, we heard when the Minister of Finance at some point said, look, I think at the onset of this administration that just about 6 million Nigerians pay tax. I understand that number has gone up, but not so significantly. It's still very low, considered among the lowest even in Africa. So why is it so difficult for us to do that?
Well, first of all, to put some context to that that fact you just raised now about the size of our tax net, and maybe very closely related, the revenue, the size of our revenue, the tax revenue of our Nigerian government. Just like the IMF report says, in Africa, you'll be shocked to find that Nigeria, I think only one country is lower than Nigeria in terms of the tax to GDP ratio. Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio is 3.6%. Lower than countries like Togo, lower than countries like even the DR Congo that is at war, lower than, like I said, it's one of the lowest in Africa, one of the lowest in the world, the fourth lowest in the world. And for a country with a population of 200 million plus, reputed to have well over 12 million registered SMEs, you find that this number is atrocious. And so now to address the question of why it is so, I think it's very closely related to our lack of data as a country. So we do not have a very, very well unified and well-run identity data. We do not have a very well-run business identity data as well. So, the ease of doing business conversation that we've had, for quite a while now, is a question that needs to be looked at. We need to find a way to capture officially the small businesses that are operating in this country. We have millions and millions and millions of people that are running, businesses on a very small scale, 50,000 to 100,000 naira in turnover, maybe per day, that are completely below the radar. Those people need to be brought into the tax net and taxed in a very careful way that will not stifle their growth, that will not affect their revenues significantly. If we do this, our tax to GDP ratio can be doubled very easily. We're almost at the bottom. So achieving a tax to GDP ratio of say 10% or 15% in the next 2 to 3 years is actually a very reasonable target. But, it will take some very well articulated policy initiatives from the government.
Now, you did talk about raising the rate and of course, expanding the tax net. Some people have argued that rather than raise rate, maybe the government should just concentrate on expanding the tax net. That because as at the moment, since you do not have enough people paying tax, why not get more people to pay tax first before you now begin to talk about raising the rate? I'm just wondering, which should come first?
Yeah, you're right, especially when you do look at the fact that our poverty challenge, the fact that you have 133 million people living in multidimensional poverty, and if you look beyond multidimensional poverty, you probably have some people that you still add, to that number. However, it's not. I don't think it would be enough to increase the tax net, because if it were that easy, especially for our governments and their notorious inefficiency, notorious perhaps incompetence, then they would have done it. So I think, yes, we must raise the tax rates, but it has to be carefully targeted. And again, you have to wonder who the people are that are crafting our fiscal policies. So for example, raising tax rates with regards to luxury goods will be one very easy win. Raising tax rates with regards to excise duties, where you're taxing things that people really don't need, to survive on a daily basis, will be another very quick win. So we can raise tax rates. We can look at capital gains tax, for example, as another area where we can everything must be carefully done so you don't affect growth and you don't stifle development. But tax rates can be raised. And because you will be targeting the upper income class, both in terms of individuals and large corporates, you can actually generate a significant volume of additional revenue based on increasing tax rates. It will be a quick win and a low-hanging fruit. The more difficult one is increasing the tax net. So yes, it might sound like it's better to increase the tax net, but because this is tied directly to availability of data and registration of businesses, capturing of business activities, and all of that, then it will take a bit more time to achieve than just carefully targeting tax rates at specific sectors and specific players within the economy.
I understand you perfectly. Let's talk about the issue of subsidy coming up once again. It's not the first time we would get this advice from the IMF asking us to remove subsidy. The government has said it's going to do that by June, probably before then, before this government leaves. It appears everything is in place to get the subsidy removed, even though the refineries, as some would say, are not working yet. But the way it's looking, it's beginning to look like the next government, this is going to be something that the next government will have to decide how it should deal with it. Now, what do you think about this whole issue about subsidy removal?
Look, again, DG, we have been on this subsidy thing for as long as I can remember. And the most recent significant effort towards the removal of subsidy happened in 2012. And you remember the Occupy Nigeria protests was wide-ranging, and happened all over the country. The mantra then of people in opposition to subsidy removal was, do not kill subsidies, kill the corruption that is within the subsidy system. And I think that the argument has not changed. At that time, the then Minister of Finance and the central bank governor promised that within 3 years of subsidy removal at that time, that they would have, I think they said, 4 additional greenfield refineries in addition to the 4 existing government refineries. That was 12 years ago. 12 years. As we speak now, we do not have 1 single additional refinery from government, and we only have that one by the private operator that is about to take off. So you have to ask yourself, we do need to take the subsidies out, but why have we not addressed the fundamental issues that must precede removal of subsidy? Local production, very, very critical. If we are not producing petroleum products locally, removal of subsidy entirely will kill the economy. It will kill the economy. Operators in that sector have said that when subsidy goes, that we'll be talking of pump prices of maybe between 750 to 800 naira. That's a 400% increase over what we have now. And I tell you, a lot of people will simply not be able to operate anymore. Cars will have to be parked at home, and you might not even be able to take buses because transportation costs will go up.
So the government has spoken about what do you think? What do you think then? Sorry to interject. So what do you think then should happen?
No
because
problem.
Look, at the moment we're doing about, is it more than 6 trillion per annum on subsidy?
Per annum.
And that the figure is likely to go up because consumption level is going up. The price of crude is also going up. I'm just wondering, it's plain that this is not sustainable. So how do we deal with this? How does the government, because you don't remove it, I'm just wondering where the government will get the money to pay.
Look, it's very simple. For me, it's very simple. However, I know that for the guys in government, it might not be so simple, because a lot of political will and sincerity will be required. Before you take out the subsidy, you must produce PMS locally. It's a must. If you do not do that, taking the subsidies will only make things worse. I can guarantee you that. And you will see, June is just around the corner. When the subsidies go, if the government actually has the courage to do it, you'll see that the country will, simply go into a crisis, and the policy will be reversed. So it's not the way to go. What the government needs to do might not be simple, but it has to be done. 1, we must reduce the cost of governance. We must reduce the cost of governance as a matter of priority and as a matter of urgency. 2, we must increase revenue. So again, this is where the advice from the IMF comes into play. There are low-hanging fruits for the government that if they implement, you can send the Supplementary Finance Act, for example, to the National Assembly, and, by June, you could increase certain taxes, and that might possibly increase the government revenues, let's say, just hypothetically speaking, by 500 billion naira. That shaves off a portion of the 3.36 trillion subsidy for the half year. So there are a lot of other things, measures like this that can be taken to increase revenues so that you can accommodate the subsidies in the short term. If you do not deal with this and you take the subsidies out, DG, I think the government, let's not forget that this is a government, we're going to be talking about an administration that is just starting under very controversial, circumstances where legitimacy is even being called to question and all of that. You do not want to add this type of spark to that already very potentially explosive situation. So I would strongly caution the government to tread softly on the subsidy removal issue, look at the tax revenue issue, look at how to significantly boost revenues, in the next 6 months so that we can accommodate those subsidy bills for the short term. I'm
really struggling to see where
the
revenue will come from.
The subsidy
honestly.
system, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really struggling to see where that revenue will come from to shave off, just as you said, half year, over 3 trillion in petrol subsidy. What do you think of this $800 million facility now that we've just received from the World Bank? Of course, the government has said it's going to deploy that as palliatives now to soften the effect of subsidy removal. You don't think that will also make a difference?
I'm sorry, it will make absolutely zero difference, for a simple reason. If you just do the numbers are very easy to do. The government has already said this amount will go directly, to the 50 million most vulnerable on their social vulnerability register. 50 million people sharing $800 million, DG. It comes to just above 7,000 naira per head, one-time payment. How is this a palliative? This does not address the significant loss of purchasing power, loss of the pocket, revenue to the pocket of the average Nigerian that this would mean. This would not address the significant increase in cost of living that this will mean. Once you take the subsidies out, transportation costs will go up, food prices will go up, rent, will go up. Everything will go up significantly immediately. It's going to be an immediate response, So 7,000 naira to 50 million people does absolutely nothing. If the government wants to talk about palliatives, we definitely will not be talking of $800 million. We'll be talking in the region of several billions, maybe 10 billion, maybe 20 billion, just picking up the top of my head. And we'll be talking about very carefully designed palliative measures that will deal with things like public transportation, that will deal with things like agriculture, and in boosting of productivity and getting farm produce, as cheap as possible to the marketplaces and stuff like that. Not sharing, a conditional cash transfer scheme that will just be a one-time thing. It will not solve the problem. So this 800 million for me, $800 million is a non-starter.
The Dangote refinery is expected to come into operation soon, probably before June. And we also understand that at least one of the refineries that the government is fixing to might come into operation. You don't think this refinery is coming into operation now could help make the difference and enable the removal of this subsidy?
If Dangote comes on stream, then yes, we'll be talking. Because Dangote refinery, if memory serves me well, I think their production capacity is about 600 barrels per day, 600,000 barrels per day, pardon me, which should just about cover our local consumption needs. The local refineries, our 4 local government-owned refineries, have been under turnaround maintenance for about 2 years now, and a cumulative amount of about $4.5 billion have been spent. They were supposed to have come on stream as at March this year. They have missed that deadline, and from all indications, they are nowhere near commencement of production, perhaps except for one, just like you said. So let's assume that Dangote comes on stream, and maybe one of our local refineries also come on stream, and we're able to produce the volume of locally required PMS as required. Then removing the subsidy can become a conversation that we can look at, because if you are producing locally, then the pump price of PMS will probably not be anywhere near what the marketers are talking about now, and it might be more sustainable. But that is a huge condition, and let's not also forget that when Dangote refinery comes on stream, they are not going to go to full capacity immediately. It's going to take a couple of months, maybe a year, before they hit full capacity. So it's still a situation in flux that you can't plan this type of very socially disruptive policy on at the moment.
Well, and just by the way, just by way of information, the Dangote refinery actually has capacity to do 650,000 barrels of oil per day. So it's really massive. Mr. Segun Shekuta, thank you very much for coming on the program and for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, that's how much we can take on the show today or this week. We thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.